everybody. Welcome back to the Mythgard Academy. This is session number 22 on the Name of the Rose. Tonight we're actually going to get to Jorge's sermon after the Inquisition, and maybe we will begin to approach the really altogether remarkable vision of what's his name? Adso's vision, his latest vision that he has had in the church. I was gonna say, and this time it doesn't have anything to do with the doors, except actually I kind of think that's not true. But anyway, we will see. We will see how close we get to approaching Adso's vision. I keep almost saying Adelmo. I don't know why I keep making that verbal mistake here this evening. I hope I don't make it all the way through. All right. Before we begin, two announcements. First is just to remind you that our next moot is coming up soon. We are going to be, I'm going to be in Belgium in a week and a half. We are less than 2 weeks away from Willowmoot in Leuven, Belgium. Really looking forward to seeing our European friends again. That will be a great time, as it always is. So I encourage you, if you are anywhere in the area, to come join us in Leuven, which is not far from Brussels. He says confidently, having never been in Belgium before. We'll see, but on the map it doesn't look like it's all that far away. So anyway, we will. This is what is going to happen, and I'm looking forward to seeing Belgium for the first time and getting to see many folks, some for the first time, and many once again for Willowmoot in Belgium. The second thing that I wanted to announce is there's a new thing that we have released at Signum. A lot of people have told me over the years, very politely, that they quite enjoy all the stuff that I do, but they would sort of be interested to see more, Signum stuff that isn't just me all the time. And I have heard this, and actually, indeed, there's a great deal of stuff that Signum has and can give folks access to that is not just me. And so we're going to be shining a spotlight on that stuff a little bit more. So for more on that, let me share with you a brief recording, a little promo spot.
Hello there, and welcome to the Story Web on the Signum Scene podcast from Signum University. I'm Christopher Bartlett, the mad violinist, and I am also the fiction submission coordinator in the Signum University Collaboratory. If you don't know what that is, all shall be made plain in future episodes. For now, let's say it means that I get to read lots of really great fiction that I'd love to share with you. To that end, I'll be interviewing authors of fiction and academic works that appear in the Collaboratory or in the Signum store. We'll talk about the works themselves and what went into creating them. The interviews will appear here every couple of weeks. I'll also highlight any new works that have been added to the Collaboratory since the last episode. I want to share our excitement about what creators are making in the Collaboratory. Stay tuned, or at least subscribed, to learn more.
All right. Okay, so that was a little audio soundbite for the new podcast called The Signum Scene. That is going to be the first episode of which will be released very soon. So I wanted you to stay in touch with that. It's going to be really great to be able to hear from more of the authors and creators who are involved at the Signum Collaboratory. So much really fun stuff going on there. So check that out. All right, let us get back to the text and to the solemn sermon from Jorge. Now, we have to remember the context. We've just come to the end of the Inquisition, and you will remember that for everyone else, there was our experience filtered through Adzo, right, was focused on like his conversation with William afterwards, right? So we did like a little bit of unpacking and responding to it. And of course, William is immediately focused not on the Inquisition, that is, not on the fate of Remigio. Even less, of course, does William seem concerned about the fate of the girl. And nor does he even, to Adzo's surprise and slight disapproval, doesn't even seem that much concerned about like the entire reason that he came to this abbey in the first place, which was to represent the interests of the emperor in his argument with the Pope, which has at this point now, post-Inquisition, totally and utterly failed. But William is still focused on the thing which is like in the bigger picture, like the incidental thing that happened along the way. That is the solving of the murder mystery since they've been at the Abbey. So again, after the Inquisition, we as readers and Adzo has had this like little interlude in which not only are we kind of invited to think about something else other than the Inquisition that just happened, but of course, like the very subject of that conversation is on why William is not thinking about the Inquisition that just happened. However, it's important to recall that for most of the people, right, for most of the, the monks and the delegates and the folks who are all still gathered there, this moment, like, they're not only thinking, many of them, of course, are thinking about, either their supporters of the Pope who are delighted that, in the total victory of their side, or they're the other Franciscans, like Michael and Ubertino, who are deeply chagrined about this, and Ubertino has already sneaked out and left for fear that he was going to get murdered. But even beyond that, even beyond the politics of the situation, think from the point of view of the rest of the monks who were also there watching the trial, the Inquisition, and what they saw was not only one of their own brothers, Remigio, be brought in and put on trial for heresy, not only be convicted for heresy, not only confess to have been a follower of Fra Dolcino, which would by itself have been a significant shock, presumably, to many of them. But then, of course, remember Remigio's performance at the end when he was trying to avoid torture, and his enormous blasphemies that he was uttering to the shock and revulsion of everybody else there. And again, this is one of their brothers whom they've been living with here in the monastery, who has been feeding them, for years. So the Abbey, which has been quite unsettled by this series of deaths, of mysterious and horrible deaths that have been happening, so already deeply disturbed by all that, but then disturbed by this whole big political spectacle in which, remember, the Abbey and its reputation has been very directly involved. You remember that the abbot was one of the losers. That humiliating the abbot was just like, a little bit of the icing on the cake, right? Just a few of the little, the little frosting roses on the cake of Bernard Guy, right? Anyway, but then in addition, to see on top of all of this, one of your, trusted brethren of, the past few years, groveling on his face and summoning demons in front of you. I mean, it's been a rough time, right? And the abbot stands to address them, doesn't address them, because, and Adzo, who is very knowing, right, by this time, Adzo deems that that he was very wise, right? The abbot was very wise not to address any remarks himself to the abbey. Of course, Bernard Guy and everybody else is still there in the audience. That he's because basically there's like nothing he can say. Like if he says anything even indirectly, casting aspersions at Bernard Guy or any of his accusations or findings, then he gets himself into really deep trouble, as Bernard Guy was warning at the end of his speech. If he accepts it, then he is like heaping, further opprobrium upon himself. Like he's in a no-win situation, and even Adso recognizes that he's in a no-win situation. So you'll remember, by the rules of the abbey, if he doesn't speak, the right to speak, the right to preach the sermon, then devolves upon the most senior of the monks. And the most senior of the monks is, good old chickpea chewing Alenardo, who on the one hand doesn't seem to be quite up on current events, while at the same time being the one who has completely nailed the apocalypse-based pattern of the murders before anybody else did, right? Right, as Calvin says, I love him. He knows everything, right? Exactly. Right, he knows everything except like anything, right? It's complicated, but anyway. So he skips over him. He skips over Alenardo, and asks Jorge to speak. Because now Jorge is the second oldest, so it's not like he's just randomly cherry picking. All he's doing is silently passing over Alenardo, which is on the one hand, like nobody's really confused because Alenardo's not 100% there anymore, and yet like not even to gesture at it, right? Not even to arrange in advance for him to say no or something like that. Like it ruffles a little bit, right? Jocelyn, I don't know if chickpea chewing is a thing. I mean, it seems probable that people do chew chickpeas. I think he just gums them. Like but I don't even know. Like, and are they like raw? Like, is it raw chickpeas that he's chewing? I don't even know. Yeah. More experimentation is needed, I think, to determine what exactly one does with chickpeas. I mean, I can't imagine he's just mushing up cooked chickpeas. Yeah, JJ, maybe we need to do a Mythgard reenactment. Yeah, at Mythmoot. Yeah, no, we totally should. Yeah, yeah. We'll give it a shot. Maybe I can try to convince one of the kitchen workers to be complicit and hand me some chickpeas, just like Adso handed them to Alenardo. Anyway, okay. I'm not going to say the chickpeas are irrelevant because like that was a whole focal point of like one of their conversations, but anyway, so it is, Jackie, as you said, it's certainly a slight of Alenardo, but at the same time, it seems clear that the abbot wants Jorge specifically to be able to speak. And of course, we shouldn't be surprised when Jorge gives a very forthright sermon, right? So let us check that out. Most beloved brothers, he began, and all of our guests most dear to us, if you care to listen to this poor old man, he goes on in that vein for a little while. It sounds like he's going to be sort of gentle, but then he's not. The 4 deaths that have afflicted our abbey, not to mention the sins, remote and recent, of the most abject among the living, are not, as you know, to be attributed to the severity of nature, which, implacable in its rhythms, ordains our earthly day from cradle to grave. All of you no doubt believe that, though you have been overwhelmed with grief, these sad events have not involved your soul, because all of you, save one, are innocent. And when this one has been punished, while you will, to be sure, continue to mourn the absence of those who have gone, you will not have to clear yourselves of any charge before the tribunal of God. So you believe. Madmen, he shouted in an awful voice. Madmen and presumptuous fools that you are! He who has killed will bear before God the burden of his guilt, but only because he agreed to become the vehicle of the decrees of God. Just as it was necessary for someone to betray Jesus in order for the mystery of redemption to be accomplished, yet the Lord sanctioned damnation and vituperation for the one who betrayed him. Thus someone has sinned in these days, bringing death and ruination, but I say to you that this ruination was, if not desired, at least permitted by God for the humbling of our pride. Whew, okay. First of all, the specific reference that he's making, which I want to make sure, I'm not going to assume that everyone gets every random New Testament reference. He's of course referring to Judas. There's a couple passages in the New Testament that talk about Judas's betrayal of Jesus, saying that it was necessary, Jesus had to die. It was the necessary means by which Jesus was going to be sent to his death, but that does not excuse Judas for doing it. But woe unto him by whom the offense comes. So that's what he's referring to here. So he is comparing the murderer to Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus. And let me not assume that you know even what that means. The betrayal of Jesus. Jesus was arrested and brought before first the Sanhedrin, the Jewish priests and elders, who then brought him, sent him to Pilate, to the secular authority, the Romans, who then condemned him to death. But he had to be betrayed. He had to be handed over to them, because the people supported him. So he couldn't just be arrested on the streets. Had either the elders of the temple or the Romans just tried to arrest him on the street corner, there would have been riots. It would have been awkward. So they didn't do that. Instead, they found someone, Judas Iscariot, one of his 12 disciples, who would lead them to him when he was alone at night. Anyway, so, yeah, Eric says, the history of modernity is just teachers realizing they need to explain more and more Bible references. Yeah, I think I've mentioned this before. One of the most important, useful English classes I ever taught when I was teaching undergraduates was a class I called Foundations of Western Literature, which was a 2-semester class in one of which we just read Greek mythology, Greek and Roman mythology, and in the other of which we just read the Bible. And I didn't have them write any papers. I just gave them quizzes. They had to just remember what all the names were and what all the stories were so that they could get the references and everything else that they read. And let me also just add that my students the exams that I used to give in that class, which I would just give quotations that contained references, Bible references or mythology references, and ask them to explain this passage in light of that, in light of the allusion that they're making. And let me just say that my former students, are blessed that I did not at the time remember this book in general, or man, that have gotten a lot of revelations, or more specifically, Adzo's vision that comes, I think, in Terce, there in day 6. Because, boy, I could have quoted them any single paragraph from that chapter as like their entire exam. Basically, like, holy cow. that that vision was off the chain. Like, off the chain. It is just incredible. Yeah. So yeah, exactly, Calvin. Yeah, like, it's like the final exam. Like, you couldn't possibly every joke in the vision. Like, it's way too much. Seriously, a single paragraph. I bet you I could have found a single sentence, which would have been enough for a complete final exam for that class. I mean, oh my goodness. Just like the lists of all of the Bible characters, like sitting on something or holding something. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, it's true. It would have been a very long sentence, Jackie. So in a sense, that would be cheating, but holy cow. Like, just reading that through again, I was just like, this is unbelievable. This is so much. And by the way, spoiler, I am not going to attempt to explain all the jokes. I'm not going to even, I'm probably going to give them all a miss. Like, it's too much. Like, we could do an entire class just on that chapter, because I would end up basically, some of you were saying it would be really useful to do a class like that in Mythgard or in space, and I agree, but like, that's what it would become. Like, trying to explain that one chapter would be, I'd be basically telling all, like, a huge percentage of like the narrative stories from the Bible. Like, I'd be summarizing them myself. Oh my goodness. It's just crazy. But yeah, so I'm not going to do that, but let me get back to Jorge. Okay. Yes, Jackie, I have to admit, I love reading Umberto Eco sentences aloud. One of the things I've been looking forward to in talking about Jorge's sermon is just reading his whole rhetoric aloud. It is just delightful, even if it would be intimidating to have these words and these sentences directed. These sentences like mountains directed at me. Yes, I agree. Each sentence is a journey, Eric. Absolutely. Absolutely. In any case, okay. Why does he bring up Judas Iscariot? Back to Judas Iscariot, which is what got us off on this whole sidetrack. Why does he bring up Judas Iscariot? Because again, he's comparing the murderer to Judas Iscariot. The murderer is like Judas Iscariot in that he is guilty. He is guilty of doing a horrible thing. And he will be damned and vituperated therefore. But like the sin of Judas Iscariot, although the sin itself is horrible and shall, JJ, as you pointed out, yet remain evil, it brings about a thing which God wanted to be. And that is what he says, the humbling of our pride. Remember what it is that why does he accuse them of being madmen? What does he say they're madmen for believing, the monks? What they're madmen for believing is that all save one are innocent. And he doesn't just mean that in a, like, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God kind of way. He says, you're all thinking that it's awful that one among you is guilty of murdering your brothers. Like, it's a terrible thought. But you're comforting yourself that it's not you, right? And so therefore your own conscience is clear. And that's when he starts yelling at him, right? Madmen and presumptuous fools. The murderer has but agreed to become the vehicle for the decrees of God. God has passed judgment on this abbey. and the murderer is the instrument of that judgment. Not innocent, not good, not sanctioned by God, but is being used as the instrument of God. Now, if you know Revelation, and I've been inviting you to read the book of Revelation, which, as you can tell by now, would have come in very handy in understanding this book. This is also the pattern that we see there. They all like to talk about the Antichrist, and Jorge's getting there, right, in this sermon. The Antichrist, of course, is another example of one who is an instrument of evil, who is doing horrible, horrible things, but whose actions are part of the judgment of God upon the world, right? And remember what the wise Alenardo, who knows everything, said. The almost innocent perspective that Alenardo demonstrated in some of his early conversations with Adso and Brother William, which Brother William took as like evidence of his madness, or, senility perhaps, which it is, right? Namely that he thinks of the abbey as the entire world, like the abbey is his entire world. And so he believes, or he speaks as if, Alenardo speaks as if, the prophecies in the book of Revelation are about the abbey, right? When the apocalypse, book of Revelation, talks about the end of the world, it's obviously talking about what is happening at the abbey, because the abbey is the world, right? So, and again, that was, on the one hand, when he said it, it seemed like an obvious example of the lack of perspective that he had, right, on the world around him. And yet, as the murders have gone on, it has seemed not only an unexpectedly apt description, but even insightful. Even William has come around to kind of, not in all of its senses, right, but almost seeing things from Alenardo's point of view. And Jorge also is speaking, and there's nothing delusional here in what Jorge is saying. That is, it's Jorge's speech here does not suggest, as Alenardo's did, a kind of a slippage of his understanding boundaries, right, and his understanding how the world works. And yet we can see a similar sort of pattern. Is the abbey also Jorge's entire world? Gerald asks. So, sort of, in a sense. I mean, he's been here for almost as long as Alenardo. And yet, there is one very significant way in which Jorge's world is a great deal larger than Alenardo's. And that's the books. Remember that Jorge has almost the entire library memorized, in some sense. Like, he's got the whole library in his head. Whether it's like knowing what books are there and having at his immediate recall the table of contents of almost every book in the entire library, being able to paraphrase at length, whole passages from any random book people were wondering about in the library, right? So, Jorge, Alenardo, there's that sense of constraint, right? That his world is very, very small, very, very constrained. Jorge's world, though geographically constrained as much as Alenardo's, and for almost as long, yet there's this sense of like a broader vision of Jorge's world, And yeah, Eric, I'm really glad that you brought that up. The parts of the library are literally named after the regions of the world, right? The library is the world. But I think this works in two ways, right? You can look at that, Eric, in the sense that the library is there is no world outside the library, right? But you can also so the abbey is the world, right? QED. Just look at the library, right? It'll show you that if you go inside, but then you'll probably die or whatever. You're not supposed to in any case. But again, there's another way to look at it, though. I think, Eric, that is, you could take that as sort of evidence of a more Alenardian view of the world, or you could look at it almost the other way around, right? That because the abbey contains the library, and the library contains the whole world, like mapped out in the world, right? In the order of the world, like the whole world is in the abbey. It's not that the world is so small that again, there's this sense of constraint, like Alenardo's living in a very, very small world, right? Jorge, instead of living in a very, very small world, is living in a very, very big abbey, right? If you see what I mean, if you see the difference there. Yeah, there's a microcosm, macrocosm sort of thing going on there. What else of the world does Jorge need? Besides which, he's blind. That is, he can't go out and see the rest of the world, right? He has all that he needs stored in the library, and in his case, stored in his head. How many of the monks know about the library map? Almost none. Almost none. Only those with library knowledge, direct library knowledge. Now, some might conjecture at it, because remember, you can see there is that publicly perusable catalog, right? And so you can see there, and you'll remember that Adso and William were, in fact, sort of speculating about that. But yeah, as far as actually knowing how it's laid out, yeah, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So that is a fascinating idea, Maureen. Maureen is suggesting a comparison between the library and the tree of knowledge. That is the tree that Adam and Eve were supposed to not eat from, right? I love that comparison, Maureen. I'm a little resistant to it because I don't feel the narrative has been pushing us in that direction. I might just miss it. There's some Adam stuff. Yeah. You could maybe make a case, but I haven't feel that it's I don't feel that it's been. I haven't felt pushed in that direction. It's a really interesting comparison, but I'm always really nervous to invest too much in comparisons that the book doesn't kind of hand me at all. You can do it, and it's really interesting, but I want to focus first on the connections that the book is really making, especially making repeatedly, like, for instance, all the apocalypse stuff. Yeah. No, I mean, here's the thing, Maureen, here's the thing that really strikes me about it, though. The thing that really strikes me about it is that there have been so many opportunities. I mean, again, the reason I find myself resistant to it is not because it doesn't work, but because it works really well, and yet I don't recall it ever coming up. I mean, when we're talking about, like, the Forbidden Library, And we've even been using the phrase like forbidden knowledge, and yet like nobody has been making Eden references. Like, I mean, that was, if you will excuse the expression under the circumstances, low-hanging fruit right there. And yet the narrative has never plucked it, right? And thus I am reluctant to pluck it myself. Doubly under the circumstances, perhaps. But anyway, let's let's keep going in Jorge's sermon here. I am he who is, said the God of the Jews. I am the way, the truth, and the life, said our Lord. Let me pause for a second before we go on. Make sure we're getting those two references. I am who is, said the God of the Jews. He's here quoting Exodus. This is the name that God reveals of himself from the burning bush to Moses, right? I am who I am. Yes, exactly. This is the name of God, the Tetragrammaton. So that's a really important moment, the moment of God's self-revelation. This is his answer to Moses' question. When God says to Moses, hey, go tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And Moses is like, yeah, but who do I say sent me? And he says, he identifies himself. I am who is. I am who I am. So God's naming of himself, his revelation of his name in Exodus is the first reference. The second reference is Jesus' teaching, I am the way, the truth, and the life. This is in his discussion on the night before he is betrayed and subsequently crucified. In his, like, the Last Supper discourse, this is in the book of the Gospel of John. And he's just said, like, you know God and you know the way. And they're like, how do we know the way? We don't know what you're talking about. And he says, I am the way and the truth and the life, identifying himself as the way to God. It's one of several I am statements in the gospel, of which John in his gospel is particularly fond. So these are the two quotes that Jorge identifies. God's naming of himself, Jesus' identification of himself as the way, the truth, and the life. God is the God who is. Jesus is the way to God. He is the truth of God. He is the life of God. There you have it, Jorge goes on. Knowledge is nothing but the odd comment on these two truths. Everything else that has been said was uttered by the prophets, by the evangelists, that is the authors of the Gospels, by the fathers and the doctors, to make these two sayings clearer. And sometimes an apposite comment came also from the pagans, who were ignorant of them, and their words have been taken into the Christian tradition. But beyond that, there is nothing further to say. There is only to continue meditation, to gloss, preserve. This was and should be the office of our abbey with its splendid library, nothing else. Okay, let's pause there for a second. Yes, different kinds of doctors. He's talking about the doctors of the church, like St. Augustine. That is, he's listing there all of the authorities. The prophets, that is, he's talking about like the authors of the Old Testament, the authors of the New Testament, the authoritative church commentators, people like St. Augustine and Gregory the Great and folks like that, the patristic fathers, all of these folks, those are the fathers, the doctors, people like Thomas Aquinas. Everything that has been said by spiritual authorities in all of history is merely an odd commentary on those two truths. I am who is, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Everything that's ever been said, he says, is a comment on those things. Yeah, it's true. Doctor means teacher. When I was in grad school and my wife was in med school, I used to occasionally say that like I was the one getting the real I was the real doctor and they were just physicians. It never went over well. But so I soon gave up trying to make that distinction. Anyway, doctor does mean teacher, in fact. And so does rabbi. Yes, exactly. Yes, JJ, I'm interested that you point that out. That was one thing I was going to comment on, which I think is interesting about. There is one thing so what Jorge says here is almost completely traditional. This is and I think I've mentioned it before. St. Augustine's method for teaching people how to teach the Bible. And that is the top-down method. There is the core truth. There is the fundamental fact. And everything else is a commentary on it. So you keep in mind the one certain thing and, the twofold truth that is at the heart of everything, of the whole Bible. And as long as you keep that in mind, you can't go wrong teaching anything else about the Bible. Because the Bible very thoughtfully gave us an answer key, essentially. But the answer key, JJ, as you point out, is the place where Jesus says that the whole law and prophets can be summed up in one thing. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. He says, in these two things are contained all the law and the prophets. That's the verse that St. Augustine would have said, knowledge is nothing but the odd comment on that one truth, though he called it a twofold truth, the love of God and the love of your neighbor. And this, of course, is how St. Augustine defined caritas, English charity, love, right? Caritas, the Christian love, was defined by Augustine in exactly that way. It is the twofold love of God and your neighbor. And that is what the Bible teaches, the twofold love of God and your neighbor. And so long as whatever it is that you're teaching, so long as whatever interpretation you're doing of the Bible is consistent with the twofold charity, with the twofold love of God and your neighbor, then you're not wrong. Can't be wrong, right? If what you're teaching is consistent with that. Now, Jorge is using the same method. He's using the same concept, but he doesn't choose that verse. He doesn't choose that as the core, which I think is interesting. Yeah. And Eric, of course, I'm not suggesting that his passages are like weird or anything. I mean, it's a, these are moments of revelation where God reveals who he is, where Jesus reveals who he is and what his purpose was, right? Like that, right? Good choices. If you want to summarize, right, what the Hebrew Bible is saying, what the Greek New Testament is saying, good candidates, those two verses, right? Eric, I agree. What is most interesting about it is that he chooses verses about knowledge and not about love. Augustine's focus, he was in his, again, the work I've been quoting is De Doctrina Christiana on Christian teaching, written by St. Augustine. And that's a handbook for preachers, basically. So St. Augustine was teaching people how to preach about the Bible, is what he was doing. And therefore, he was very interested, Eric, as you point out, about practical things like love, right? How do you explain what the Bible says we should do well, what we should do is love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. That's what we should do, right? And that can be worked out in lots of different ways. It can look different ways in different circumstances. You can take different lessons about it from different places. But at the end of the day, that's what you're preaching about, everybody, right? Every week is some version of that, right? But Eric, as you point out, Jorge this isn't that kind of sermon. What he's interested in is knowledge. What is knowledge? If you are interested in knowledge, if you want to attain knowledge, he says there are only two pieces of knowledge that you need. Who is God? Who was Jesus? If you know those two things, you have all the knowledge not just all the knowledge you need, but all the knowledge that there is. Knowledge is nothing but the odd comment on these two truths. Everything that all interpreters and teachers have ever said, all wise and good things, are just commentaries on that. Even wise things that pagans have said that are worth remembering are themselves also only commentary on those two things. They didn't know that they were, right? But if, like Plato and Aristotle said wise things about God and his nature, well, they didn't know where they were getting it, right? They didn't know, in a sense, they didn't know what they were talking about. But it's true because it is, their words have been taken into the Christian tradition because it matches up with this truth, this revealed truth. Okay, so what's the corollary to this? If all knowledge, the only knowledge you ever need, is summed up in those two verses, then why do you need a library at all? You don't need a whole library to contain this. He just said it in two exceptionally short sentences for an Umberto Eco paragraph, right? So why do you need a whole library on it? And indeed, he goes on to address exactly this question. It is said that an Oriental caliph one day set fire to the library of a famous and glorious and proud city, and that as those thousands of volumes were burning, he said they could and should disappear. Either they were repeating what the Quran already said, and therefore they were useless, or else they contradicted that book sacred to the infidels, and therefore they were harmful. So knowledge, the Oriental Caliph argues, all human knowledge is worthless. Either because everything you need to know is in the Quran. So if either it's repeating what's in the Quran, in which case you don't need it, or it's contradicting what's in the Quran, in which case you shouldn't have it because it's false, right? So get rid of the library. Who needs it? So again, you see how this seems like the logical extension of the argument that Jorge has just been making. But note, Jorge's not making it. He's about to contradict that as we go on. The doctors of the church, and we along with them, did not reason in this way. Everything that involves commentary and clarification of Scripture must be preserved, because it enhances the glory of the divine writings. It is true that all knowledge is just an odd comment on those two fundamental truths. But that doesn't mean that commentary is not useful. All of the commentary that has been written, all of the wise things that have been uttered by prophets, evangelists, fathers, and doctors, and by wise pagans as well, have helped us to understand these profound truths better. That's great. That's really good. So what about the lies? What about the things that would seem to contradict these truths? Do we burn that stuff? No. What contradicts must not be destroyed, because only if we preserve it can it be contradicted in its turn by those who can do so and are so charged in the ways and times that the Lord chooses. Even the false information, even the lies, even the ignorance, even the things which contradict those fundamental truths should be preserved. Because by preserving them, we can, in the fullness of time, under the guidance of the Lord, contradict them. Okay? So Jorge, so this, I think, is really important. Obviously, this is very relevant to the Abbey. And this should be reminding you of those initial conversations that William and the abbot had about the library. And, like, why William couldn't go in the library. What is... Remember those, like, the mission statement of the library? That the, again, not the librarian, but the abbot was explaining, right? What he said should be the office of our abbey, right? To continue meditation, to gloss, to preserve, right? To continue thinking about these truths, to meditate upon them and to gain more and more wisdom from them. To gloss, meaning to write commentaries on it, to share that wisdom with other future generations who will want to continue meditating on these truths. And to preserve both the true things and the false things. So no Oriental Caliph setting fire to the library of a proud city. So he starts from what sounds like the same premise that the Oriental Caliph of his story started from, but he comes to completely the opposite conclusion. Now, my brothers, what is the sin of pride that can tempt a scholar monk? Remember his accusation at the beginning of his sermon when he called them all madmen for thinking that they were innocent, and said that the murders and all of the horrible things that have been happening at the Abbey have come to pass as a judgment from God upon their pride. The pride of this Abbey. The pride of all the monks sitting here. You're all guilty of this pride. So now he's coming to the point. What is the sin of pride that can tempt a scholar monk? That of considering as his task not preserving, but seeking some information not yet vouchsafed mankind, as if the last word had not already resounded in the words of the last angel who speaks in the last book of Scripture. Yes, another apocalypse quote. This from near the very, very, very end of the book. For I testify unto every man that heareth the words of the prophecy of this book. If any man shall add unto these things, God shall add unto him the plagues that are written in this book. And if any man shall take away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God shall take away his part out of the book of life, and out of the holy city, and from the things which are written in this book. There. Does it not seem to you, my unfortunate brothers, that these words only adumbrate what has recently happened within these walls, whereas what has happened within these walls adumbrates only the same vicissitude as that afflicting the century in which we live, determined in word and deed, in cities and in castles, in proud universities and cathedral churches, to seek anxiously to discover new codicils to the words of the truth, distorting the meaning of that truth already rich in all the scholia, and requiring only fearless defense and not foolish increment? This is the pride that lurked and is still lurking within these walls. And I say to him who has labored and labors to break the seals of the books that are not his to see, that it is this pride the Lord wanted to punish and will continue to punish if it is not brought down and does not humble itself. For the Lord has no difficulty in finding always and still, thanks to our fragility, the instruments of his vengeance. Okay. So, yeah, hang on. We'll come back to the breaking of the seals later. Yeah, I know it's a lot, Jackie, isn't it a lot? So that's why I want to kind of parse it in order. I don't want to start with the breaking of the seals because it comes at the end. Okay. We've got the long Revelation quote in which, and it's a warning that's given at the end of Revelation. The angelic messenger says it to John, to whom the book has been delivered so that he can write it and send it to the churches, and says, if you add anything to this, you're in trouble. If you suppress anything out of this, you're in trouble, right? And he's speaking specifically about the prophecies in Revelation, but Jorge is broadening the application, right? Where is the pride? What pride are the scholar monks guilty of? Not preserving, but seeking some information not yet vouchsafed mankind, as if the last word had not already resounded in the words of the last angel. As if the angel at the end of the book of Revelation hadn't already said, don't seek to add anything. To try to understand better what has been revealed, great. To meditate upon, to preserve, to gloss, these are the good things. These are what the abbey was designed for, Jorge says. But to go beyond, to find out new things, to add. This is the pride that lurked and is still lurking. To discover new codicils to the words of the truth, distorting the meaning of that truth already rich in all the scholia and requiring only fearless defense and not foolish increment. All you need to do is try to understand the truth that has been revealed. Not foolish increment, to try foolishly to add more truth that hasn't been revealed. As Chaucer would say, don't pry into God's privité, the secret things of God. And yes, then Chaucer makes a ridiculously dirty joke out of that. But punning on privité and people's backsides, whatever. Anyway, the point is, you're not supposed to discover new codicils to the words of the truth. What was the debate about? What are the Pope and the Emperor fighting about? What was the question? Poverty. Specifically, yeah, it was about power. It was a political question. But that's the point, right? The explicit subject on which they were debating was, did Jesus own his clothes? Was Jesus himself poor? Did he, insist on remaining personally poor? Because then that would provide an example, blah, 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 right? And we know where it all spins up into politics from there, right? That is an example of what Jorge's talking about. So Jorge, you see why the abbot called on him, right? Instead of taking one side or the other, he's calling them all out. Everybody who participated in the discussion. He's like, shame on all of y'all. You're trying to find out whether Jesus owned his clothes. If we needed to know that, we'd have been told that. We're not told that. And of course, as we've seen, he's not wrong to say that in trying to establish the absolute truth or falsehood of that statement, that Jesus owned his own clothes, we can see the ways in which that statement is only being used as a manipulation in power politics. In other words, it's not actually about truth. It's just an example. It's just an illustration, frankly, of why they're going in the wrong direction. Why their whole relationship with truth, with revelation, is diseased. And again, notice he calls out everybody. In cities and in castles, in proud universities and cathedral churches, as well as in this abbey. Everywhere. The emperor's people, the pope's people, everybody is doing this. This is the pride that lurked and is lurking within these walls. Again, I saw a question before about, is he saying that like research is bad? Well, again, it depends on what you mean by research. No. Developing new understandings? No. That's exactly what meditation and glossing is about. You're supposed to be spending your time, like, learning is good. Even learning the pagans, like even reading the pagan works is good, because some of the things the pagans said are good. And even when it's not good, it's good to know it so that you can know how to refute it. And fresh meditations should always be coming in order to help us understand the revealed truth more perfectly. So there's always room for development, but that's the difference between there's research and then there's research, right? He's all about understanding the truth better. He is condemning as a very grave sin of pride the desire to find a new truth which God did not choose to reveal. Now, Maureen, let's come to the breaking of the seals. This is the pride that lurked and is lurking within these walls, and I say to him who has labored and labors to break the seals of the books that are not his to see, that it is this pride the Lord wanted to punish, and will continue to punish, if it is not brought down and does not humble itself. What's the it that he's referring to here? The pride. So he's doing a complicated thing here. So Jocelyn, this has nothing to do with scientific research. Nothing at all. Because science. Now, I don't want to get into this too deeply. First of all, in the word science is a Latin word. It means knowledge. It's what he's been talking about this whole time. He just told you about science. There you have it. Science is nothing but the odd comment on these two truths. Since Jorge is, of course, speaking in Latin, that's literally what he would have said. Scientia is nothing but the odd comment on these two truths. So that's what science is. Natural philosophy, that is the study of how the world works. William's a big fan. Roger Bacon, his master, big fan, right? Those things are good, but that's not seeking after a different truth. That's not seeking out a different revelation. Again, notice what he says contains the truth that matters, the fundamental truth. It's revelation of the nature of God. I am who is. I am the way, the truth, and the life. It is possible that in some way you could be led to a further gloss on that fundamental truth by studying natural philosophy. Because remember, God wrote 2 books. One of the books he wrote is the creation, is nature around us. And so by studying nature, by learning more about nature, you can learn more about God. But that's indirect. And in any case, it's not additional truth about who God is going to be revealed in that way. So anyway, Jorge's not talking about that at all. What he is talking about is are questions that are being asked, such as, for instance, did Jesus own his clothes, that the Bible doesn't answer, and that do not contribute in any way to meditation upon the fundamental truths of God's nature, right? That's the kind of pride that he's discussing there. Yeah. Anyway, so it's complicated, but the most important thing that I would say is that, again, it's not like, but what about scientific discovery? That would not have been seen as a fundamentally different thing, really. It's one form of applied knowledge. And Jorge isn't talking about applied knowledge. He's not might he have opinions on that too? Maybe he does, but that's not the subject of his sermon here. Again, what he has in his sights are everybody who was just participating in that discussion. Now, but anyway, back to the breaking the seals. Thank you, Maureen. Okay, so he's doing a complicated thing here. On the one hand, he's talking about that pride. He's talking about this impulse to try to discover new truths about who God is that God did not reveal in the Bible. That's the pride. That's the big problem. And he metaphorically compares that. Somebody who would seek to, again, remember, he calls it pride. What does that mean? Why does he call it pride? He calls it pride because it means you're going beyond, like, humans receive this revelation. They can't force it. You can't boss God around. If God hasn't told us something about himself, we can't make him. And so for us to pry in, again, we weren't told whether Jesus owned his clothes, right? So it's not just a foolish question. It's a prideful question to think that you can rule on that in either direction firmly. And that tells you something about the nature of God and therefore gives you political power. So the breaking of the seals of the book is a reference to Revelation, of course. There's a book. It's the book of God's judgment on the world. And it needs to be opened in order for the day of the Lord, for the day of judgment to come, which will set right all the wrongs of the world. But the problem is it can only be opened by the one who is worthy. And nobody is found who is worthy to open the book. And John, who's seen the vision, he's like seriously bummed out about the fact that like there isn't anybody who's worthy to break the seals of the book. But then one is found. And the one who can break the seals of the book is the Lamb. The Lamb who is wounded as if he was slain. This is Jesus, right? Allegorically Jesus. It is only Jesus who has the authority to break the seals of the book of God's revealed judgment. So that's why he's comparing the pride of the arrogant scholar monks who are trying to find knowledge that God has not revealed. He's comparing that to them saying, I'm worthy to break the seals of the book. I can crack open the seals. Do you understand how 7 seals work? I don't even know how many years I read that passage in Revelation before I understood what it was talking about. So, of course, the book that it's talking about is a scroll, not a codex. And the thing about a scroll, like the way that you unwind a scroll, you can seal it in multiple places. So you can roll it all up and then put a seal on the outside so that you can't open it at all before you break the first seal. But you can also seal it in the middle in places. So if you break the first seal, you can unroll some of it, but then there's another seal. And so you have to break the second seal in order to pull out a little bit more and see the next passage, and then break the next seal to pull out a little bit more and see the next passage. So in order to read the entire set, the entire book, you have to break each seal along the way. That's the actual physical metaphor behind the breaking of the seven seals and why they have to be progressively broken. And when they are broken, something else happens because a new passage is revealed of, the day of the Lord, the day of judgment. Partial revelations. Yes, indeed. So again, this idea of saying that these arrogant scholar monks are breaking the seals is saying that, again, they are putting themselves in the place of Christ. We can reveal truths about God that he didn't reveal. We're worthy to do that. And we're going to do it again and again, right? Progressively until we, the wise ones, right? Until we have unfolded the entirety of the scroll, right? So you can see the accusation that he's making, but notice the other thing he overlays with that at the same time. Break the seals of the books that are not his to see. Just like the library. The books that they're not allowed to see in the library. And of course, running throughout this whole murder mystery, which is one of the things that has interested William so much in this murder mystery, is a forbidden book, as he was just emphasizing to Adso. There's a book that people want to read, really, really want to read, and it seems to be at the heart of the murders. And Jorge seems to be alluding to that here. He couches it in what sounds like a generic apocalypse metaphor, such that people like Bernard Guy are going to hear him, and Bernard Guy will take the message. Probably won't like it, but he'll take the message about, putting yourself in the position of Christ and unrolling the book of God's mysteries yourselves, right? And he'll think that's all that Jorge's saying. But the people in the room who are still trying to find the secret book, the forbidden book, the book that has been getting people killed, they will understand the other thing that he's saying, because he's talking to them and saying, if you keep trying to break the seals of books that are not yours to see, that pride will continue to be punished. Okay. Big finish. We will meditate instead on the words the Lord will utter to drive from him those who have not earned salvation. Far from me, ye accursed, into the eternal fire that has been prepared for you by the devil and his ministers. You yourselves have earned it and now enjoy it. Go ye from me, descending into the eternal darkness and into the unquenchable fire. I made you, and you became followers of another. You became servants of another Lord. Go and dwell with him in the darkness, with him, the serpent who never rests, amid the gnashing of teeth. I gave you ears to hear the scripture, and you listened to the words of pagans. I formed a mouth for you to glorify God, and you used it for the lies of poets and the riddles of buffoons. I gave you eyes to see the light of my precepts, and you used them to peer into the darkness. I am a humane judge, but a just one. To each I shall give what he deserves. I would have mercy on you, but I find no oil in your jars. I would be impelled to take pity, but your lamps are not cleaned. Go from me. Thus will speak the Lord, and they, and perhaps we, will descend into the eternal torment. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen, all replied with one voice. Yeah, Eric, it's a reference to the parable of the virgins. Okay, I am not going to attempt to explain the parable of the virgins, but here it is. Jesus tells this parable of there were 7 wise and 7 foolish virgins, and they all brought lamps because they're waiting to get into the wedding feast. The wise virgins brought oil for their lamps, and the foolish virgins didn't bring any oil for their lamps. And then the gates open, and a voice is heard saying, "Come ye into the feast, light your lamps and come into the feast." And the wise virgins who have oil in their lamps, they say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to light my lamp because I've got oil and I'm good. I'm going to go in." And they're like, "Good job, wise virgins. That was great." And the foolish virgins are like, "Oh crap, we don't have any oil for our lamps. Hey, wise virgins, can you share some of your oil with us? Because like you've got like a bunch of oil and we don't have any oil. You share with us and we'll all have some oil." And the wise virgins are like, "Dude, no, we can't. Then we want to have enough for ourselves. You should have brought some oil. Like go get some or something. Like what's wrong with you?" And so they go in, and then the foolish virgins who didn't bring any oil, they go in, they get oil, and they come back and it's too late. And they can't get in. The end. That's the parable. And yes, we have to go back to till we have faces again. Exactly. Oh, it's 10. I'm sorry. I said 7. Yes, you're right. 10 virgins. So there's, yeah, and it's not about spilling the oil. Don't think too literally about till we have faces. But 7 scrolls, 10 virgins. I'm getting my biblical numbers mixed up. At least I didn't say there were 40 of them. Anyway, okay, yeah. So that's the parable of the virgins. As I said, I'm not gonna gloss it, right? I will let you meditate on it yourself and achieve wisdom on your own. But that's what he's alluding to when he says, "I find no oil in your jars." He's saying y'all are foolish virgins, right? Or at least Jorge is saying that's what God is going to say. Why do you not have oil in your jars, people? Why are you foolish virgins? Because instead of putting oil in your jars, you've been doing other useless stuff. Right? That's what he's following it up there. "I gave you ears to hear the scripture, and you listened to the words of pagans instead. I formed a mouth for you to glorify God, and you used it for the lies of poets and the riddles of buffoons. I gave you eyes to see the light of my precepts, and you used them to peer into the darkness. I would have mercy on you, but I find no oil in your jars." So that's what he's talking about. That's why he says that there. Okay. Now, Sarah, that's a really interesting point. Does this section walk the line between commentary and putting words in God's mouth? You could definitely say that, Sarah, couldn't you? Right. What Jorge would definitely say he's doing here is applying the revealed truth. Again, the distinction is, now again, it's, first of all, this doesn't mean that all commentaries are equally valid, or that like anything that you can say if you just quote the Bible to say it is right. Of course, even the fathers disagree with each other in debate, right? And anyway, yeah, hey, good to see you, Sarah. So I agree. It is a little bit interesting that in elaborating this quote, in doing his little comment, because this is a commentary, right? He's basically kind of commenting on 2 different passages, right? He's commenting on, Jesus saying, "Far from me, ye cursed." He's commenting on that. He's glossing it. And also he's glossing the parable of the virgins, right? By bringing it in and applying it here, he's suggesting some things about what he believes that parable to mean, right? But I think what he's clearly not doing, on the one hand, I think what he's clearly not doing is the prideful thing that he was talking about before. He's not trying to find out something new about God. What he's doing is applying what has been revealed. So I don't think he's going way outside the line. I don't think he's proving himself to be a manifest hypocrite in the way that he does here. But Sarah, you have a really good point that it's a little bit conspicuous, the manner that he chooses for articulating his commentary. He doesn't just say, "Brothers, meditate with me upon this saying of Jesus." Let me quote exactly what Jesus said, and then let us meditate upon it together. Instead, he puts his own interpretation into God's mouth, right? He says the whole thing as if this is what God said. Like, this is absolutely what God meant. It's not, again, it is not the kind of pride that he was chastising it. I don't think it's hypocritical, but it's edgy. Right? It's definitely edgy. And I think that you do have a point. There is a kind of almost startling confidence that Jorge is speaking with here. Yeah, exactly, Calvin. It's definitely a commentary on what's already been said. And yet, it's couched in a way that makes it sound like he's adding to what Jesus actually said. Right. So yeah, it's yeah, as I say, Sarah, I think you're not wrong to feel that he's walking a very interesting line here. Yeah. And so sorry, Jocelyn, just reading. So Jocelyn was just saying very sensibly, if God wanted it all to be clear, he wouldn't have messed around with parables that are interpretable. Right. No, sorry, it's not you. That was my reaction to being like, well, okay, let me just explain another thing I'm not going to explain. Jesus talked about this, explicitly talked about why he taught in parables. And when they asked him, why do you teach in parables? Why don't you just tell people this stuff straight up? Why do you tell these stories? And he says, so that they won't understand. I'm not going to explain what Jesus meant by that. That's another thing I'm not going to explain. Anyway, but the point is, that's what you're pointing to is like a whole thing. And again, Jorge is embracing that. This is why the meditation and glossing. Meditating, glossing, preserving. These are the jobs of the abbey. Those are noble things. Those are good things. Those are important things. And they're necessary things. Yes, the fundamental truths are revealed in those two verses, and we don't need any different or additional truth. It's sufficient. And yet, our understanding of it is not sufficient. And it's going to take many, many lifetimes of people in order to contemplate and discuss and come to a greater and greater understanding of those truths. And that's what he's doing, right? So again, he is 100% in support of that kind of activity. But also, one thing that I would, none of you have brought this up, but I just want to make sure nobody's confused about this. Just in case anybody is out there thinking, but hang on a second, aren't these medieval Catholics talking? And, doesn't the Catholic Church teach that, the Pope's declarations about Scripture are completely authoritative and therefore, can be known for certain, and you're supposed to believe those things when he says something like that? What I would point out is that doctrine has only been around for less than 200 years. The medieval church did not believe in the infallibility of the Pope. As, of course, you can deduce from all of the things they've been saying about the Pope throughout this book. There have been precious few individuals in this book who could be accused by any modern reader of believing in absolute papal authority. Anyway, the Catholic doctrine of the of any kind of absolute authority of the Pope, the infallibility of ex cathedra declarations of the Pope. That's a modern doctrine. It's a modern Catholic doctrine. It's not a medieval doctrine. I've often said, and agreed, Eric, even the modern doctrine has lots of caveats but I've often said when explaining this to students that like the the medieval church, given everything that was going on with their popes, were not such great fools as to push forward a doctrine like that. Can you imagine the abbot of this abbey, or Brother Michael, or even Jorge, thinking that, yeah, let's. I think we can all agree that the Pope's declarations are infallible. But anyway, yeah. So it's but anyway, the point is just that it's not relevant. It's not a medieval doctrine. So just in case anyone was thinking that the stuff that Jorge was saying about contemplation and glossing and coming to a better understanding, in this kind of organic and scholarly way over time, seemed in some way contradictory to Catholic doctrine. It wasn't, not medieval Catholic doctrine. Okay, so with that, I skipped over like the really colorful bits where Jorge breaks into like the threats about how the Antichrist is coming and about to arrive, and starts describing him, right? Which leads Brother William to make that crack under his breath that it sounds like he's giving a self-portrait, and Adso like laughs guiltily and has to cover it up and pretend he's coughing, and is totally scandalized that Brother William would make a joke like that. Anyway, I skipped that bit of the sermon, but Jorge really gets into the description of the Antichrist. But yeah, Jocelyn, suffice to say, he really like doubles and triples down on what many have said. First and foremost, our wise chickpea chewing friend Alenardo, who said before that like Antichrist is, this just shows Antichrist is coming, is probably already here, right? All right. Next time, in our next class, we will actually get to the next death. I'm confident now in saying, having gotten past Jorge's sermon, that in the next class we're going to get to the death of the librarian, Malachi, and that we're going to get to the dream of Adso, the vision / dream, whatever, of Adso. But remember what I already warned you. We're not going to parse the dream of Adso. I'm not even going to quote most of the dream of Adso, because it is just monumentally, overwhelmingly too much. But there might be little snippets that we will look at briefly. Yeah. I seriously, I almost got dizzy reading that chapter. I was like, I've got to sit down here. It's incredible. But anyway, we'll address it, and then hopefully get so far as William's cunning interpretation. So realistically speaking, I doubt we're going to get much. I doubt we're going to get much further than Sext. Tell you what, let's read through Nuns, just in case. Maybe I'll get really feisty and actually constrain myself to, in fact, not talk about too much of the vision. But yeah. So let's read up through. Wait. Yes, through and including Nuns, stopping it between Vespers and Compline, and then we'll see how far we get next week. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening, and I hope to see everybody next week. I say hope to. I'm leaving for Belgium but it's not until the next day. So I think I'll be okay on Wednesday night, barring disaster. All right. Thanks, everybody. Good night now.